Okay.
We have a lot of names now. So you want to go at like 5 after maybe? That's
Okay, well, just 2 more minutes then?
yeah.
5 after 4? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think that works. Yeah, that moves really quick. Let's do like 7 after.
Good afternoon. There are still few seats up in front, so if you want to come all the way up, you may find yourself a seat. But we have reached the Washington University rule. It's 7 minutes after 4, so we can now officially start our program. Welcome to Olin Business School and to this special David R. Callahan Jr. Memorial Lecture. I'm Mahendra Gupta and Dean of Business School. And it is my proud pleasure today to welcome our special speaker, but also the students and alumni of both Olin Business School and Engineering and Washington University to this lecture to hear our guest, Jonathan Rosenberg. Jonathan, I think they must have read the news that your company bypassed Apple in terms of overall market valuation. Lot of interest. The David R. Calhoun Jr. Memorial Lecture Series was created to promote discussion of the important role of business in a free society. David Calhoun was a member of Washington University's Board of Trustees from 1955 to 1974. As vice president of the St. Louis Union Trust Company and later chairman and CEO of the First Union, Inc., Mr. Calhoun held positions of significance and influence he used for the betterment of the community. The development of St. Louis was his special interest, and his efforts were recognized in 1956 when he was the inaugural recipient of the St. Louis Globe Democrat Man of the Year Award. In 1973, he was presented the Levy Stone Award by Downtown St. Louis for extraordinary leadership in the downtown community. Today's speaker boasts a similarly illustrious reputation. Jonathan Rosenberg is the co-author of How Google Works. Many of you probably have read the book. If not, you can go and buy one at the bookstore or download on Amazon or whichever other medium that you use. But here is now to introduce our speaker is our Chancellor, Marcus Wrighton.
Thanks very much. There are some seats. I see people standing in the back. There are a few seats over here to my right. It's a real pleasure to have such a distinguished speaker for the Calhoun Lecture this year. Obviously, everyone is engaged in one way or another in using Google, and learning how Google works should be of great interest, and I'm looking forward to the presentation myself. This memorial lecture is one of several that enables us on a continuing basis to bring very distinguished people to our campus. Also, it's a reminder of the important contributions that others have made who've been affiliated with Washington University. We're in an era where we are encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship across the institution, and to hear about how Google works will help illustrate the importance of this initiative. I'm very pleased that Jonathan Rosenberg is here. He is a parent and a husband, and his wife and daughter are here. Hannah, his daughter, is an undergraduate majoring in our School of Engineering and Applied Science in the area of electrical and systems engineering, and his wife Beryl is here as well. We thank them for coming. I'm not sure they've heard Jonathan give many lectures, but we're all interested in hearing him, and I'm sure they are as well. Jonathan is currently an advisor to Larry Page, one of the co-founders of Google. Prior to this role, Jonathan was Google's Senior Vice President of Product Management. He oversaw the design, creation, and improvement of innovative products in the company's portfolio. He helped to give us Google mainstays such as Search, Gmail, Android, and Chrome. Before joining Google, Jonathan led some of the premier product development teams of the Internet's early years. He founded the group At Home and served as Senior Vice President of Online Products and Services after the merger of Excite and At Home. Prior to that, he managed the eWorld product line for Apple Computer. So perhaps it's noteworthy that now Google is succeeding in going beyond Apple in terms of market capitalization. As Dean Mahendragupta mentioned, Jonathan co-authored this important book, How Google Works, The Rules for Success in the Internet Century. It was published in 2014. It's a best-selling book that revealed business and management lessons Jonathan and Mr. Schmidt learned as they helped build one of today's most significant companies. Tonight, Jonathan is going to share some of those lessons with us. It's a real reward to have him here at Washington University and to hear his presentation on how Google works. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Rosenberg.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, What a kind introduction. You know, I feel a little bit like Winston Churchill, who said, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." You know, you go on a book tour and you work for the most valuable company in the world, and people ask you what they want you to say, what you want them to say about you, and then they say it, and they even embellish a little bit, and then they turn the podium over to you and say, well, now you have 45 more minutes to burnish the legend of Jonathan Rosenberg. I mean, you know, it's easy. You could just start on the back cover. There's a really nice Photoshop picture of me. I have a lot more hair. And it'll start, you know, Jonathan is this omniscient savant. He saw every transition in computing 5 years ahead and could always see 5 years into the future. You know, starting when he went to work and saw the transition from many computers to PCs, and then from enterprise to consumers, and then all the way to cable modems. And then he showed up at Google and he figured out the business model for search. And poof, the world's most valuable company. I like that narrative. Unfortunately, it's not true. It is true that my wife and daughter are in the audience. And, you know, if I told that story, Hannah would go around tomorrow and she wouldn't be quoting Churchill. She'd be quoting Clint Eastwood from Dirty Harry. You know, my father's a legend in his own mind. So I thought I would do is instead share the truth, right? And any of you watch Steve Jobs' 2005 Connect the Dots speech? Okay, well, I guess people in the Valley people here don't watch all the same things we do. So if you haven't watch Steve Jobs Connect, just run a search on YouTube, Steve Jobs Connect the Dots. And, you know, basically he talks about how you can't really connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So what I'd like to do is kind of skip the Photoshop management gospel and the stuff the PR folks usually ask me to spoon up, and connect some of the real dots that Eric and I saw when we started writing How Google Works. So let me start by taking you on a quick thought journey from my career. I got out of business school in 1985, and I went to work for a company that made data center management software. And I showed up, and the boss puts a PC on my desk. It was actually an IBM PC XT with a 10 megabyte EverX hard drive and a Diablo daisy wheel printer. And it sat there and did nothing. And every quarter, I would send out a newsletter to our entire installed base, and I would go sit down on an IBM Selectric and type the mailing labels. Then one day, a smart admin showed up, and she said, you know, there's a product called Mail Merge, and you could type all the addresses in once, and then the Diablo daisy wheel printer would spit them out. And over the next 5 years, what did I do? I actually figured out that the PC was worth something. 5 more years go by, same boss comes in, and he says, it's now 1990, you've got mail. I'm like, why would I want mail? There's no email, everybody's getting email. And I said, well, what would I use that for? He said, well, I don't know. Then he goes back to his office and comes running back down the hall, and he says, my office, it's all the way in the other corner. I'm going to be able to tell you what to do much faster. It's a good thing. And of course, for the next 5 years, I actually figured out what email was. 5 years later, as we mentioned, I was at eWorld, which was a proprietary online service based on AOL technology. And people were talking about browsers and the internet and open standards. And I was like, I didn't get that either. And so 5 more years, phones came out. They could actually do email and texting. I missed that. 5 more years, Eric Schmidt, what was Eric talking about? Cloud. We should have all your data in the cloud. And I was like, I like all my data right here on my IBM ThinkPad. And then we started talking about robot cars. I talked to a bunch of students just now about robot cars. We didn't think that was going to happen. Well, now, deans, they're talking about online learning, right? Well, every one of these transitions I missed. So what did I do? I got a job as the Senior Vice President of Product Management and Strategy at Google. And I showed up, and I wrote very rigid plans about what was going to happen over the next 5 years. And Larry threw up on them. He was like, this isn't how we do product development here. We're going to embrace a much more iterative approach. And I think what I now realize retrospectively is that Eric and I came of age when we came to Google at a very profound moment in the 21st century, which was this moment where everything is speeding up. But the architecture of business, the things that we're taught in business school, actually are designed to avoid risk and not to maximize speed, so they were holding us back. So we wrote the book. The book really focuses on this new environment where speed dominates and businesses need to come up with a new way to scale and a new way to build great products and hire employees to succeed in this kind of environment. And we sort of go through, culture and strategy and decision-making, innovation, communications. Well, did anybody read the book? Anybody? Do we have anybody who read? Come on, the soccer team, like some of you could just put up your hands to make me feel better, right? And the coaches, I'm going to give you a pop quiz halfway through the lecture, so, So what I want to do is, as you guys think about your careers in this first internet century, I feel like the book is kind of a how-to guide on management, but this isn't a corporate retreat. You're largely engineering students, so what I want to do is help you understand these underlying dynamics that have changed the rules of business. And I did learn one thing in my Google tour of duty and also on the book tour, and that was that it's really hard to take a business person like me or an economist and teach them first principles of physics and engineering and computer science so they can predict what's going to happen 5 years in the future. But it's actually reasonably easy to take an engineering student and help them understand just enough economics and business to navigate their careers. So, my first piece of advice is if you're an engineering student, listen to my lecture. If you're in the business school, take a class in computer science, engineering, or rigorous statistical analysis. So, let me explain to the engineering people, more like an academic economist, what has actually changed in the world and how does it change the way you need to think to win? Well, there are three big things that have changed, okay? And you see these in the reports. If you like, do you download all the same analyst reports that we do in Silicon Valley? I'm sure you do, the ones that come from New York. They'll say things like, well, the internet, mobile, and cloud, that changes everything. Well, what does that really mean? What's the internet about? Free information. What's mobile about? It's the ability to connect with each other for free. And what's the cloud about? The cloud is about cheap or almost free computing cycles that exist for all of us to harness. It used to be that when we talked about business, we have somebody in the business school, we talk about the factors of production, right? What are the factors of production in your old business school text?
Labor.
Labor's one, yeah. Was there another? Anybody? Land, right? A plot, right? Land, labor, and capital. Well, all those things were expensive. They were scarce resources. But now, in this new production function, we have free information, the internet, reach, mobile, and free computing cycles. And these things are different because they're plentiful. They're not scarce. And that makes the management theory that we apply to managing inputs obsolete. The first engineer to actually figure this out was Bill Gates. Bill Gates said about his experience in the late 1970s that he realized that the cost of computing was coming down. And since the cost of computing was coming down, he was going to focus on software. An economist or professor in the business school would say he was going to be the complementary scarce resource to the thing that was going down in price. Now we have not just computing power going down in price, but we have information becoming free and reach becoming ubiquitous. What's the next big change? The next big change, you hear economists talk about general purpose technologies. These are the things that come along only once every century or so that change everything. So historically, what were they? Steam, electricity, the computer, and the internet. But the old general purpose technologies had a very different property. If you look at steam, the steam engine was invented to pump water out of flooded mines, right? And it took like 100 years before it actually was hooked up to the steam engine or the railroads. If you go down to Union Station, actually in St. Louis, you'll read about the Wiggins Ferry Company, which had steam engines in like the 1790s. And then by 1890, what did they call it? The Terminal Rail Association was actually moving more humans and freight than any entity in history. But it took 100 years. Same thing happened with electricity. Electricity took 20 years to replace steam, mostly because all of the managers were experts in managing steam. So we needed like a generation for all the old farts to die out before we actually had Henry Ford and people figuring out that we could place the electricity close to where the work was being done. So all of these things took a great deal of time. But then the internet came along. And the internet was driven by very different laws, right? Moore's law, processing power doubling every 18 months. Kreider's law, storage becoming very cheap. Bandwidth becoming ubiquitous. These things were happening much, much faster. And it only took a few things coming together at once, a browser, TCP/IP, and HTML, and boom, suddenly you had a dynamic that was completely changing the world. And then companies start coming on the scene very, very quickly, much faster than they ever have before. Well, why is that? It's because the tools of production in this new environment with information, reach, and computing power have all been democratized. Today, we have open source software. We have robust protocols. We have APIs that allow you to build on the work that has been done by others. And these are all digital building blocks. The way they're working to create companies is they're connecting data sets. But they're connecting the kind of data sets that are not just the information that was in a newspaper, right? They're connecting things like business ratings, or product information, or people skills, or traffic information. They're connecting things that can actually be involved in consummating a transaction. And all of those data sets have another very different property that goes back to your economics text, since we have both engineers and economists here. They are non-rival goods. I mean, you know the definition of a non-rival good versus a rival good? Yes. Nothing else in the market like it. That's kind of close. That's part of it. But rival goods? What was that? Well, competition, but okay, we'll go to, let's stay at sort of elementary college examples. Pizza, okay? Pizza is a rival good. If you get a piece of pizza, and there's 10 pieces, and your roommate's name is Brutus, and Brutus eats 9 of them, you don't get to eat them, right? A non-rival good is something that doesn't get used up. Forest Park, is that the name of your park over here? Or a museum. So all of these things are non-rival goods. And if you think about all of the products that are coming out today, look at Waze, which Google purchased, or Uber, which is building on Waze. Each of these things are able to build on the digital building blocks of the previous information without using them up. In fact, they're not using them up, they're making them better. And they're combining information and connections with people in a way that lead to platforms. Every one of these things, if you look at them, they're all combinations, they're all taking information and connecting it to a person. And when you do that, you create a very valuable property. You create a platform. So just go back and think about the phone, right? 1 phone isn't very valuable. 2 phones is Watson, come here, I need you. 3 phones starts to become valuable, or many phones. It's people to people. The fax was the same thing, people to information. The VCR, people to content. eBay, buyers to sellers, sellers to buyers. And then Google building all on top of all this, users to information to advertisers. So these things emerge, and they get combined in a world where there's no friction, there's no transaction costs. And that's what's spawning all of these commercial opportunities that we're seeing. You have, if you read in your economics textbooks, they'll say things like, well, assume a frictionless market and all that sort of stuff, 0 information costs, 0 transaction costs, that's the stuff that they always write. And then economists like Frederick Hayek would say, well, economic activity will spontaneously combust. Well, it actually does, right? That's what eBay was, right? Every buyer could find every seller, and the information costs were 0, and the transaction costs were relatively low. What we're seeing with all these products that are emerging are information costs go to 0, and transaction costs go to 0 because we're eliminating risk, right? We're creating these reputation dynamics. So that's the way I sort of refer to what we faced as this new environment on the manufacturing side of the equation. But free information has changed the other side of the equation as well. Free information has changed the consumer side and the individual side in profound ways. The whole balance of power has been shifted by information, reach, and computing power. The balance of power is shifted because we all know which products suck and which ones don't, right? You can't convince somebody to buy something by dint of overwhelming effort or marketing resources. And a hit takes off much, much more quickly. So when I first met Larry, I was at Excite, and Excite was a search engine that's dead now. But we wanted to license Excite, and my boss said, well, we wanted to license Google. My boss said, well, we don't have to worry about them. Our search engine is almost as good. We'll just outmarket them. And Larry, of course, said, no, on the internet, people will find the best product. And it seems that that's proven right, right? If you look at Google or Angry Birds or WhatsApp or Instagram or the new solitaire game my wife likes, what is it? Churchill Solitaire. It must be a good product. It's better than me. She always plays it when she's with me. So the better product just takes off. It takes off easily. And if you go back to what I said about the manufacturing side and these tools that have been democratized, they've made the work of individuals much more important. Products today in this internet space are created by individuals or they're created by very small teams. Did any of you read the Mythical Man Month in your computer science classes? I must have a computer science professor here. Well, as the more people you put on a team, the more difficult it is to actually produce something. So individuals in this world, they suddenly matter much, much more. So let me give you an example. Let's say I own a company, and I make bricks. I need a big, strong bricklayer. Josh Whitman, you stand up. Okay, I needed to pick a big, strong bricklayer. And what's your name? Samantha. Okay, can you stand up too? Stand right next to Josh. Okay, so if they're laying bricks, right? I mean, we'll give Josh some credit. He can lay like 10% more bricks than she can, right? So maybe we'll pay him 10% more. But now, switch places. Now you're engineers. She's a better engineer than you are.
Absolutely.
She's only a little bit better than you, okay? She's only 10% better than you. So she makes Angry Birds, and you make almost Angry Birds. Everybody downloads what she's produced. Nobody downloads what you've produced. So you can sit back down. I'm done with you. You produced Angry Birds. You can sit back down, too. But individuals can have much, much more impact. And in the book, we call these individuals smart creatives. They're the subset of people that actually have the business savvy, the passion, the persistence in the face of failure that they can actually produce in this kind of environment. And what we learned was that young people today, they don't like it when you tell them what to do, right? So you can't tell them what to do, but you can manage the environment in which they think. So we focused very much on trying to figure out how to make sure you don't let the suits become more important than the lab coats, which is why I don't have a tie on. If you look at the way old management models evolved, they were very hierarchical. They were hierarchical because the gate factor was people spending money on those other factors of production, those inputs that were very expensive. So we created hierarchies. We told people what they were and weren't allowed to do. We funneled information, and we managed information carefully. And we're now in a world where people have access to all the information they could possibly want. So the whole dynamic of users, the whole dynamic of sharing information has changed. You need to share everything with these new employees. So what I want to do is kind of give you a sense through some stories of some of the things that we specifically learned at Google, but kind of from the lens of if I were you and I were looking for a job, what would I think about as kind of a litmus test of whether or not the company that I was talking to was going to be successful. So the first relates to kind of the foundational thing that we talk about, which is culture, right? I started at Google in February of 2002, and we were just starting to come on to the model for ads. And Larry was very focused on the ads actually being good, the notion that ads could have quality and be things that people actually wanted to see. And he was very upset because we were serving ads that were lousy. So what was he looking for? He was running searches for an H-1B Kawasaki motorcycle, okay? And thankfully, he didn't actually buy an H-1B Kawasaki motorcycle and kill himself, which is why we actually have Larry with us now. But he was getting ads for H-1B visas. They're not relevant. And there were lots of other ads that weren't relevant. French cave paintings, you run a search, and we get an ad from eBay, buy French cave paintings here, right? Because they wanted the click. So Larry went and printed all the lousy ads out. And he put them up on the wall in the kitchen, and he wrote in big red Larry chicken scratch, "These ads suck." And he went home. He didn't call me, I ran product management. In a normal company, what would happen? The CEO would call the guy that ran product management, the guy that ran product management would schedule a meeting, he'd figure out who to bring, they'd come up with a plan, they'd talk about how many resources it was going to take. None of those things happened. Over the course of the weekend, a bunch of engineers who were actually on the search team came up with this idea called a query snippet vector and looked at the pages that the lousy ads actually pointed to and figured out that they weren't related to the query, and then hooked that up to the system, created a prototype, and boom, we actually had ads quality in AdWords. In most companies, this won't happen. Because in most companies, you don't have that kind of a culture. What you have is a hierarchical culture and a mission that people don't understand. If people can't actually understand the mission in a way that it drives them to make decisions when they go into the kitchen, you've got a problem. And this is what most companies do, right? You go to a company and you'll ask them what their mission is, and they'll say something like, to build unrivaled partnerships between and solutions for our customers through the sheer hard work dedication of our passionate employees to generate shareholder value. Actually, if you run a Google search on that, if you get the words close enough, Lehman Brothers will come up. Here you'll see respect, integrity, communication, excellence. Up will come Enron, right? These things don't mean anything. So culture is the foundational element. And you want to focus on small teams. So we started to develop lots of rules for small teams, right? We call it in the book the hippo. You want to minimize hippos. Hippo, anybody who read the book, pop quiz, what's a hippo? Yeah, okay, good start. Hippo is highest paid person's opinion, right? You want as few of those as you can possibly have. And you want to manage like a sports team, right? Not all people, all people are created equal, right? We all have certain inalienable rights. We're just not equally as good as what we do, right? Gronkowski, what does Gronkowski make as a tight end? Like $54 million a year. I'm sorry, he's really good. We also came up with kind of the most controversial, one of the more controversial concepts in the book we call exile knaves and fight for divas. When you go in a company, first thing you want to see is how many knaves are there, right? You guys all know like those childhood riddles, knights always tell the truth and knaves always lie, and you get to a fork in the road, and what question do you ask him? You didn't even read the same childhood books that I read. Okay, well, anyway, skip that, it's not relevant. When when someone reveals themselves to you as like a bad egg, believe them, right? And in corporations, you have lots of these. You want to go out and find them and get rid of them. You even have them at universities. I remember when we were here in May moving out, there was a sign at the dorm, and it was on it was on the garbage room, and it said, "Please break down your cardboard boxes." And I opened the door to try to throw something away, and I can't because it's full of boxes that haven't been broken down. Like, where is that? Is that the WashU student that did that? No, don't come work for me, right? You don't want people like that in your company. But as you ruthlessly go try to get rid of all of those people, you often sweep out the divas, the people like Steve Jobs, the ones that are so good that you actually need to tolerate them. So you need to come up with a structure that exiles knaves and fights for divas. You also need to ask about strategy. But you should ask about strategy and expect a different answer from the kind of answer you're going to get from the typical organization. Most of them have read like somebody who's smarter than I am. Strategy, who knows strategy? Michael Porter, right? Or Clay Christensen, right? And what do? They say, well, let's see, if you start with the Porter approach, we're going to start with a product at the high end of the market. We're going to develop a fully featured set of functionality. We're going to get economies of scale, go down the cost curves, attack adjacent greenfield markets, and create user lock-in. Waha, this is our strategy. Or Clay Christensen will come and say, oh no, Mr. Porter, he's really smart, but he's wrong. We're going to start at the bottom end of the market, and we're going to come in with something that's not fully functional, that can actually attack from the bottom and go from the bottom up. Well, those are just plans. Those are just words. What you want to look for are technical insights, things that an engineer has built into a product that actually makes it better. And if you look at Google, pretty much every one of our products has some type of a technical insight. Search. What was the technical insight around search, right? You could use the link structure of the web to inform the ranking of search results. Ads. Ads can have quality, right? The folks in the kitchen. Mail. The cost of storage is coming way down, so you can have a much, much cheaper product in a browser with storage. Maps, you can have this virtual mirror of the world. News, you can group news by stories as opposed to by source. And these technical insights are not limited to Google, right? Salesforce had them. You could use the cloud for enterprise management, or Pixar. You could tell stories with computers. In fact, Bed Bath & Beyond. Do you guys know, do you students know why you all go to Bed Bath & Beyond? Right? It's just, you all go to Bed Bath & Beyond, like I see you all there at the beginning of the year. You all go to Bed Bath & Beyond because they had the technical insight that you could sign up for the things that you wanted at home and then go buy them at school, right? And they'd actually have them there waiting for you. So what you want to ask in all of these situations is, what is the technical insight behind the product functionality that the company's focused on? Then you want to learn and watch a lot about how they hire. And there's all sorts of stories about Google and the legends of how we hire. I just want to tell you a couple of stories there that relate to me. The first was my hiring. Since we're in a business school, it's a good story. Larry and Sergey love to ask technical people a complicated question. So you would sit down and they would say, tell me something complicated. And then, I don't know, if you're an engineer, eventually they keep asking you for something more complicated and you sort of eat yourself up. So I looked at Sergey and I was like, well, I don't know, the only thing I remember from computer science is like bubble sort, and I'm not going to explain that to you. So I thought, well, I'll go back to my economics class. Surely I remember something complicated. Oh yeah, total cost functions and marginal cost and average cost, that was all hard. I remember that when I was in business school. And so I said, well, it's easy, Sergey. You create a cost function, Q of X, and you want to prove that marginal cost bisects average cost at the latter's minimum. So you take Q of X over X, which is average cost, and if you can't take the derivative and remember the quotient rule, you change it to the product rule and make it Q of X times X to the minus 1, because that's easier. And then you set that equal to 0, and you have Q prime of X marginal cost equals average cost. And voila, I've proven something complicated. Sergey's sitting there looking at me like, I'm a math Olympian, and you just demonstrated basic college calculus. So I went into a different sermon. I told him about courtship. And I actually told the story of how I courted my wife. And we have empirical evidence that I married up. So obviously I was good at this. But what I learned was that they personally engaged in all the hiring. And they were looking for passion. And it was the passion that actually won them over. And then I forgot about all of that when I started focused on hiring myself. And I was trying to hire people. And I spent my first 8 months trying to hire people. And every person I'd bring to Larry, like, here's, this brilliant MBA from some local business school, and, he or she is great, R.J. Miller scholar, something like that. And Larry would be like, no, And I'd bring him more. And he rejected everyone. And I'm a manager. Like, as a manager, you are only as good as the people that you hire, right? So I'm busy trying to hire and failing. So I went to my mentor, Bill Campbell, who's the chairman of Intuit, and I was like on my back on his couch, ready to quit after being there for 10 months, which would have been a tragedy. And he's tried to talk me out of it. And Marissa Mayer comes in. She's now the CEO of Yahoo. At the time, she worked for me. And she saw me looking sad, and she was like 25 years old at the time. And she comes in, "What's the matter with Jonathan?" And Bill's like, "Well, he can't hire anybody." And she sort of looks around, and she says, "Well, it's my time now. I need to meet with Bill." And then she says, "Oh, no, maybe I can help. I know what the problem is." Okay, now this young girl who works for me is going to tell me what the problem is. She says, "Larry doesn't like you." And I almost like got up and strangled her, okay? And Bill, who used to be a football coach at Columbia, sort of gets between us and says, "So what would you do, Marissa?" She says, "Larry doesn't like people like you. He likes people like me. Hire more people like me." And we did. She then created the Associate Product Manager program. And what we discovered, again, goes back to what I said earlier, you can't teach economists all of the technical stuff, but you can teach people straight out of school with computer science degrees business. We also developed rules for decision making. If you read the book, we talk a lot about consensus. Eric kind of had a formula. And his formula was, we have so much more data today, and every company has so much more data, you need to start all the meetings with data, right? So it was decide with data, beware the bobble-headed yes, and know when to ring the bell was the job of management. Meaning, we'd put the data up, we'd go around, we'd ask everyone in the room what they thought, and then at some point, engineers generally, if you let them do that, they'll just argue. So you need to get them to stop arguing. Then you need to know when to ring the bell. We do not do what Jim Barksdale was famous for saying at Netscape. He would start meetings and he'd say, "Well, do we have data? If we have data, we'll look at the data. Oh, we don't have data? All we have are opinions? We'll go with mine." Right? That's sort of the alternative way to do it. And people ask a lot about kind of how all this creates an innovative organization, and they look for what are the secrets of innovation at Google. And, you know, I'm sort of struck by this because what I've realized is that people look for eureka moments, right? Like Archimedes gets in the tub, and he realizes that his body displaces the water, and since the body displaces the water, he can see the density of an object by putting it in the tub, and he jumps out of the tub, and he starts running through the streets. Eureka, eureka, right? I found it, literally. That's not actually where innovation comes from. If you look at any great innovation, what you discover is that's how we memorialize it. If you read Darwin, Darwin says, well, it was September of 1838, and I was reading Malthus on population, and boom, the theory of natural selection came into my head, right? I mean, all you have to do is read The Voyage of the Beagle, and you know that's not true. This was a work that took place over time. It didn't come as a eureka moment. So the secret of the innovation dynamic are all the things that we do from the standpoint of hiring and culture and decision-making and communication, but they're also the way we set goals. We set very, very aggressive goals. And someone was asking me just earlier for an example, and I said, you know, Astro Teller, who runs Google X, talks about the goal that he set for a car project that they work on before the robot car thing. And he said, if you set a goal for a car to get 70 miles per gallon, you're going to get a very different result than if you say to the team, the goal is to get 500 miles per gallon. And what happens? The 500 mile per gallon project, you're actually going to get better ideas from, even if you don't achieve 500 miles per gallon. And I learned in my second quarter of Google what Larry and Sergey really meant by this. And if you read the book, we talk a lot about OKRs, objectives, key results, and how we set them. And I, of course, was thinking, well, you set them in a way to make yourself look good, right? So after my first quarter, where I missed a lot of them, I was very careful with my team, and I was like, okay, well, I'm only gonna sign up for OKRs that I know I can deliver against. So it was great. We got to the end of the quarter, and we're sitting there in the management room, and everybody's going by their OKRs, and Alan Eustace, the guy who runs engineering, you know, he's red, and he's green, and he's yellow, and he's green, and he's yellow, and he's red. We get to me, I'm green. Everything is green. And I get up, and I'm ready to start explaining how green I am, and how great I am. And Sergey says, sit down, Jonathan. You have failed by virtue of small thinking. And I think that really gets to the way we think about objectives and the way we really focus on making it okay to fail. Lots of people talk about, they say, well, you have to make it okay to fail, and you need to, you know, trial and error and all that. But leadership actually needs to get up each quarter and talk about the things that they failed on. And you need to set objectives where failure is actually a built-in expectation. So I want to close with, and leave time for questions, so I want to close with sort of reasons for optimism if I were you and your age. And I want to quote the 20th century's two greatest historians. Anybody? Anybody from the history department? Any guesses? Yogi Berra is a good guess. You know me already. No, Billy Joel and my father. Okay? I mean, don't you remember? Harry Truman, Doris Day, Red China, Johnny Ray, Joe McCarthy, Richard Nixon. Isn't that where we all learned history? What's the name of the song? Name that tune. We didn't start the fire. Right, hold that thought. We didn't start the fire. So what else did Billy Joel say? He said, the good old days weren't always good, and tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. Well, what was he talking about? We used to be largely an agrarian society. We didn't have antibiotics. If it were the Middle Ages, I'd already be dead. We couldn't fly from California to come give a talk at WashU. I couldn't have eaten raspberries in my hotel this morning. We've had more progress in the last 300 years since the Industrial Revolution than in all history combined. So, who was the old fart that said, they don't make them like they used to? I mean, what don't we make like we used to? Cars? Remember changing the oil? Phones, televisions, right? Nothing used to be better. So combine that with what my father said. My father was actually an economic historian, a professor of economics at Stanford, and he passed away this last August. And so I decided if I give any talks this year, I should quote my father. He really was a historian, though. I'm not sure Billy Joel was. Anyway, he said, in hindsight, the future is obviously not obvious. I should make that an interview question. Okay, in hindsight, I'm going to spin you around. I'm going to say, in hindsight, the future is obviously not obvious. Like, what does that mean? Right? It means that looking backwards now, it's easy to see that predicting what actually happened is really, really hard. It's an unrealistic expectation. When my father talked about that, what he meant was the steam engine, which we talked about, the radio, the laser, the transistor, the integrated circuit. All of these things that took many, many years for the complementary technologies to emerge and catch up. You guys are 30 years into the generation that, what was the Billy Joel song? Started the fire, right? This was the fire that made the means of production and the inputs into production free. So, don't blame the generation before, that's actually a different song, but we've given you Moore's Law, right? We've given you Kreider's Law. We've given you ubiquitous 4G and connectivity. So what's left? The only thing that's left is the complementary resource, in Bill Gates' language, of a WashU engineer's intellect to harness these things. So I can't predict, as my father pointed out, what will happen when you go back to your dorm rooms or a coffee house and start coding. But if you start with those concepts of free information, free reach, and free computing power, I believe anyone can create the next Google, the next Facebook, the next Uber, and make the world better. And finally, in May, when you guys get ready to leave, read the sign in the garbage room. If you want to join Google or find a friend to found a startup, remember, everyone looks to see who breaks down the cardboard boxes. Thank you. Can we do questions? Yeah, we should do questions.
As long as you feel like doing it.
I can
Andrew,
stay.
You have the room, I assume, for as long as you'll stay here. Wow, that was something. As a computer scientist who spent time also with the folks who worked on the original Glass, and I actually have a Udacity course out there that's well subscribed. It's very personal. If I were going to summarize, I'd summarize it like this, that culture trumps strategy every time. Inspiration is really best when coupled with aspiration. Sorry, Mahendra, but engineering is harder than business. And apparently courtship is harder than engineering. But that was really terrific. And it is, for me, quite compelling that we're doing this here, business engineering together. I think part of the message that you hear is there was a time that engineering was, and I'll say sort of the application of science in some ways. Over the last century, engineering really blossomed into the idea of being a generator of opportunity and discovery. And now the coupling of engineering and business, partially because of the speed at which things happen, and the technical innovations required, that they really go hand in hand. And I would like to encourage the engineering students to take their business courses and the business students to take engineering courses, and I've promised that we'll produce some engineering courses you would want to take. I think with that, I think my last official duty is to invite you all to a reception that's held right out here in the Frick Forum. You got to be really careful how you say these things. And, where, it'll be a great time to share. And I thank you all for coming, and do me a favor one more time of thanking Jonathan and his family for spending time with us.